You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mott,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Charlene Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Chris Pourteau and David Bruns. Well, thanks for tuning in to Author Stories today. We've got a fantastic show for you. Go to hankgarner.com and subscribe to the show. Any way that you download podcasts, you can listen to it there. I'd like to talk about some sponsors before we get started. Scribophile is a respectful online writing workshop and writers community. Writers of all skill levels join to improve each other's work with thoughtful critiques and by sharing their writing experience. We're the writing group to join if you want to find beta readers, get the best feedback around, learn how to get published, and be part of the friendliest and most successful writing workshop online. Improve your writing by receiving detailed critiques, learn from a vast collection of free writing resources, make lifelong friends in our busy community of writers. Writing is a solitary art, but that doesn't mean you have to be lonely. Lucky for you, there are thousands of writers on Scribophile every day, and we're a really friendly bunch. You've never seen a writing group like this one? Join Scribophile today at scribophile.com. For the Words is a unique writing motivator unlike anything I've ever seen. For the Words is an online writing platform which motivates writers of all backgrounds to increase their word count through gamification. Writing can be challenging, especially when you need to consistently produce a high output of words. By injecting a little fun into that routine and using daily rewards to promote a healthy writing habit, For the Words makes it easier to reach those word count goals. We're a community of bloggers, professional authors, college and high school students, research scientists, gamers, and first-time writers from all over the world. Come for the words, stay for the fun. It's forthewords.com. That's the number 4, thewords.com. Business Essentials for Writers, How to Make Money in an Ever-Changing Industry by James Nettles. Business Essentials for Authors is your business 101 guide for the publishing industry. Whether you have never published at all or are looking to take your professional career up a notch in an easy-to-read and conversational way, the book covers the 5 pillars of business. Meet all of the people and jobs in the publishing industry and how they fit together, building the foundation of your business career, including paths to publication, understanding sales and marketing in publishing, establishing all of the operational side of any business, from contracts and intellectual property, working with different tools and technologists, and how to design and build your website, learning how money works as an author, basic accounting, and making more money. We look at all this and more from a long-term strategic view, how to get the plan done, and the mindset to make it all work together. It's Business Essentials for Writers by James Nettles. Kick. The Jenkins Cycle, Book 1 by John L. Monk. A supernatural thriller. They say suicides are damned for eternity, but if possessing the bodies of violent criminals is hell, then Dan Jenkins will take it, and he does every time a portal arrives to whisk him from his ghostly exile. Normally, before the villain returns to kick him out, Dan dishes out a final serving of justice and leaves the world a safer place. It's one of the rules if he wants more rides, and he's happy to oblige. For a part-time dead guy, it's a pretty good gig. And then he meets her. Kick is the first book in a series of supernatural thrillers. If you like Quantum Leap and Everyday, you'll love this gritty and original take on the body-hopping hero story. Vividly written, Kick is a wild ride with a sharp, sarcastic wit and a flawed yet likable main character. Kick by John L. Monk. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today I'm really excited to have my friends Chris Pourteau and David Bruns back on the show to talk about a new release that they have in the SynCorp Saga. This is the new series, if you guys remember, and I'll put a link to the previous show in the show notes so you can catch up. David and Chris were on talking about the SynCorp Saga and how this was a really unique series in that it's a trilogy of trilogies. The first one that was out earlier this year and end of last year that David kind of helmed, and now the second one that Chris is helming. This one's called Empire Earth Book 1, Valhalla Station, and we're here to talk about it today. Welcome back, guys.
Hey, thanks for having us, Hank.
Thanks for having us, Hank.
Yeah, always a pleasure. Always a pleasure to have you guys. So, what's been happening here lately? Chris, you've got a lot on your plate. David, we were just talking a little bit before we started recording about all the awesome stuff going on with you guys. How is SynCorp Saga going, and how are things going for you two individually?
Well, the saga's going pretty well. We just launched the second of the three trilogies with Valhalla Station about 3 weeks ago, and it's doing really well. It's well reviewed, and the readers seem to be liking it quite a bit. It sort of goes into the next generation of the Syndicate Corporation from the first series, which David was really the captain of in terms of writing that. So that's going pretty well. And the second book comes out May 9th, so I just finished up rewrites on that, and it's going to the proofreader tomorrow. And third book is going to be out sometime in the summer.
Excellent. How about you, David? Other than working on this series, I know you've got your hands in all sorts of stuff. What's going on with you?
Yeah, so as Chris noted, I was sort of the captain of the first trilogy in this universe, and he captained up the second one. So I went back to my day job, which is as a national security thriller writer. So
hashtag NST.
Hashtag NST, exactly. So JR, my other co-author, and I sold our first book, our A book in that series last year to St. Martin's Press, and that's coming out in June. So we're just inside of 90 days now. So you're starting to get the professional reviews and that kind of stuff coming in. In the fall, I spent writing the next book in the series, which was due to St. Martin's on January. So I sort of, went right up until the first of the year and then turned the book in. And then I'm like, whew, took some time off, went to South America for a while, and I just recently got back. So I'm sort of ramping up to figure out how you work with a traditional publisher to launch a book, because they have a lot of infrastructure going on. It's just figuring out how to use that to your best advantage.
Man,
you need to ask him about Argentina. He was there for like a month, and he came back a changed man.
Yeah.
Yes, it is a special place. It is. I mean, I got to tell you, these people eat so much red meat and drink so much red wine. It's amazing. The food is phenomenal. The wine is phenomenal. The people are phenomenal. The government itself is a mess. The inflation rate there is like 2% a month.
Whoa.
Yeah. So when we were there in February, and we got there, and the exchange rate was 36 pesos to the dollar, and when we left, the exchange rate was almost 39 pesos to the dollar, and we left like a little over 3 weeks later.
What the heck?
So actually, we took a tour. Quick side story. Yeah. Took a tour from this guy. He's a graduate student. It was like an architectural tour. We walked all over Buenos Aires, and we're talking to the guy, and he says, and we're talking about how you deal with inflation as a consumer, as someone who lives in this economy. Because for people coming in from outside, it's great because it's like monopoly money, right? But if you live there and you get paid a salary there, and you watch the value of your paycheck go down every month, it's kind of scary. He says, he gave us one little anecdote. He rents an apartment, and written into the contract of the apartment is that every 6 months, automatically, there's a 12.5% rent increase.
Yikes.
So last year, his rent went up on his apartment 25%. Now, he thinks he made out really well because the inflation rate in the country was 48% last year. So when you start to wrap your head around those numbers, it just doesn't make sense very quickly.
No, and the fact that people get comfortable with that quickly is scary. It's really scary.
Yeah. So I mean, I would highly recommend anyone who has the opportunity to go to Argentina, absolutely go. It's a fabulous country.
So I have to ask you this, because we're writers, and everything that we do adds something to our toolkit. What did you pick up that affected your creative life? And maybe it's something that's just, completely, in left field, but what do you think you picked up there that added to your toolkit?
So it was partly a research trip. And if you recall, in Weapons of Mass Deception, a lot of the action took place in the tri-border area, which is the northeast corner of Brazil, northeast corner of Argentina, where Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay all meet, where those three countries come together, and actually went there and took a picture and sent it to JR. Where those three countries meet, they're delineated by rivers there, but there's a lot of difficulty with smuggling back and forth, and there's actually a large Hezbollah population in that area from the Middle East. And that was all in our book. So actually going there and seeing all this stuff firsthand was really cool. And
they probably got some cheap housing when the Nazis started dying off. So some pretty good deals.
And so
you've been watching History Channel again.
The short story we have, which is a reader magnet, which is called "Death of a Pawn," is actually about the Argentinian special prosecutor Alberto Nisman, who was murdered when he was looking into the attack on the Jewish embassy there in 1992. So we have a lot of ties with that area in our fictional world. So I was looking at that, and we're going to go back there because some of the characters are still in that part of the world. So it was partly a research trip, heavily with a large side order of wine.
I.e., that's how he writes it off.
So, David, is it a challenge for you to switch between writing national security thrillers and speculative adventure sci-fi?
Not as much as you would think, and I'll tell you the reason why. The national security stuff, because it's all modern day, and the readers that we have really prize authenticity and facts, and JR does a ton of research that go into these books, but they're very intensive in terms of the attention to detail that goes into everything has to be checked, right? And JR does a ton of that, but it falls back on me as I'm sort of writing it and as I'm sort of weaving that into the story. Science fiction is much easier for me because if something doesn't exist, you just make it up. So it's a little bit of a field day, actually. I like the science fiction as sort of my release, honestly, from the national security stuff, because that could get pretty dark. I mean, this is realistic, modern day stuff, and you start to read about some of these things, and it can go. My browser search history is a total mess.
Or at least that's what the FBI says.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
That's so funny. Chris, this the series that you guys are writing now with the new book Valhalla Station is the newest one. This trilogy of trilogies, like we talked about, is based, at least its root is in this other book that you wrote a couple years ago, ORP, and I hear there's some news about that. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But where the story stands now, did you have any idea in the beginning when you had that other story idea that the world and this continuing story could have grown to the point that it is now?
Oh, I want to hear the answer.
What this is like your wife asking you how she looks in the pants. I mean, what what is the correct answer? I mean, the correct answer is always the one that doesn't cause problems, right?
Or it's like one of those trick questions, like, when did you stop beating your wife?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, there's no answer to that. Yeah.
Right. I always had sort of in the back of my head, because I wrote up a little World doc, I think it was like 7 pages, to get my head in the space of what I wanted to do with ORP, which is now is officially, because nobody knows what ORP stands for. It's one of 2 retirement tracks at the university that I work for, and it stands literally for optional retirement plan, because it's not the first retirement plan, it's the optional retirement plan. And I thought that was a pretty cool title for the book, as it, for the purposes of the book, but nobody else knows what it is, so it's going to be called Optional Retirement Plan when it comes out. But anyway, I wrote up like a little 7-page world doc for my own head, so that I could kind of know, well, where did this world come from, and what is it like, and who are the powers in it, and what happens on a daily basis, and what are the people like, and how do they live when they get up in the morning, what do they do? And it wasn't quite that detailed, but it was just to get my head in the space, so when my character walks into a room, there's a cultural context already sort of in my head about what he's going to see, so that I can describe it for the reader. So did I know all of this was going to happen? Of course not. No, I mean, David did a brilliant job of sort of setting the stage and painting all the sets and all of that for what I'm doing now. And the end of his series is the creation of the world that I'm now fleshing out in a different way. He fleshed out the pre-world, the prologue world, and prologue sounds like it's less than it is. I mean, there are 3 fully fledged novels there that really paint the picture for how things came to be the way they are. And then I took that ball and moved it ahead 30 years, and now I'm back in the mind space that I was in when I was writing Optional Retirement Plan. So.
Well, I know that when you and I first talked about Optional Retirement Plan a couple of years ago,
I can see you substituting the full name now. I can't.
Yeah, I had to kind of wince when I did it.
It is a mouthful.
It is. It's just a different mouthful. That's all.
Right.
When I remember us talking about it, and I think I asked you at some point in the conversation, do you think this is a series? And you're like, I don't know. It's just a standalone encapsulated story.
Right.
And I think, and correct me, but you were thinking like these characters. This was their story, and this is a satisfying story. Now seeing what David was able to do by not being in those characters' heads the way you were, and having an outsider's view, and then he could see the grander scheme and the bigger picture. Does that now help you coming back into the story to see it with fresh eyes, to maybe see the potential that David saw?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, it always helps to have somebody else to be able to. In fact, I talked to him. We're not going to do it tonight. We're going to do it this weekend. But I talked to him before we got on the air about, can we spend like 10 minutes after we're through recording with Hank so I can kind of conceptualize what's going to happen with book 3? Because I kind of have a very squishy idea of where the story's going to go and sort of round off the trilogy. But it would be very helpful to bounce these ideas off of him. And so we're going to do that this weekend. But it's always good to get a different perspective, because David and I write differently. We have different styles. We have different emphases. We both very highly value and put an emphasis on character, which is I think the thing that makes us respect one another's work the most. But we have different styles, we have different approaches, and so it's always good to say, okay, let's turn the artifact over and look at it from the other side. Now what do you see? Now what does it look like? It's not what I described, it's what he described, and really the truth for the reader is in between somewhere, right? You get both viewpoints to sort of flesh out the idea for the reader. So it's very, very valuable to have a co-author, or even if it's not a co-author, somebody that you can bounce ideas off of, because you can see it from a different, fresh pair of eyes, like you said, and really make it come alive for the reader that way. Because we used to joke about this when David was writing the first trilogy, and I know it's true of me too. I would say something like, I think that was in your head, but it didn't make it to the page. And he'd be like, oh yeah, you're right. Yeah. It's very valuable to have that different perspective.
Well, co-writing is this weird sort of alchemy.
It's a contact sport, Hank.
It is.
We have proven that.
That is.
We have proven that. I have the
I
X-rays
love that.
to show.
I'm writing that down right now. We have a number of friends that we kind of have this writer friend group, and I know several folks co-write with others, and everyone has a unique relationship in the way they share duties and the way they inspire each other. And I know like Rhett Bruno and Steve Beaulieu have a Baloo. Yeah, that's right. They like trade chapter for chapter and write into each other's brains, so to speak. I know that you guys are doing it different in that each one of you is taking a trilogy, and then the other is sort of informing that as you go along. David,
our egos are far too big.
Yeah,
to allow someone else
we
to-
learned that lesson on the first trilogy, and it was a hard lesson, but it was a good lesson.
right.
Yeah.
And then, David, your relationship with JR is completely different. How do you guys kind of stake out territory, and how do you keep writer ego in check when you're sharing responsibilities with another writer?
Yeah, so I jokingly say co-writing is a contact sport, but it's actually true. Having done this twice now for 2 long-term co-writing partnerships, I'll say a couple things. One thing is you don't really know what. Yeah, right. You don't really know what you're bringing to the party and what the other person is bringing to the party until you're actually in the party. And actually, it's not until you've done it for a while. I would say it takes a year before you sort of level out and figure out who's doing what, and because you have to try a bunch of stuff. And we tried some stuff on the first trilogy that made perfect sense on paper, and it didn't work in real life for a whole bunch of reasons. Some of them ego, some of them logistics, some of them other things. The good side about co-writing, to me at least, is you've always got somebody who's got their head in the game that you can call and say, I'm stuck on this. This character is here, and I need him to get to here, but I got this other thing going on. What do you think? And they always sort of have an answer, or at least a point of view that can get you unstuck. When I'm writing on my own, and you run into those things, you don't have anybody you could call,
Right.
and that really sucks, actually. Because so like JR and I, for example, and JR is not a writer per se, in that he doesn't write on the side beyond what we do. So JR does the front end work. He does a ton of research, and I get a completed outline. Chris and I work.
Hang on. Let me interrupt you. How long was that outline that you got from JR?
So JR's outline was like, I think it was like 200 pages. It was huge.
Oh my God.
But it had pictures, it had links, it had embedded YouTube videos, it had, snippets of dialogue and things. And I'll go through that a couple times, and I'll mine it for the story. And so sometimes, for example, he'll have, and for him, it'll be written down like chapter and verse. Chapter 1, this is going to happen, and he might give me a fragment of a scene. I might get a picture of the setting. I might get details of a handgun, whatever. But I also might get into it and find out that there's not enough there to really do the scene that we want. So I'll skip forward a couple of chapters, find a thing, and drag that back, and then so the story that he gets is the same arc that we planned out, but all the pieces might be moved around a little bit. And then he goes through and he says, well, this works, but have you thought about that? And I'm like, well, shit, no, I didn't. But I think the way Chris and I have morphed into after we've been doing this now for a year and a half, almost going on 2 years, right?
All right, yeah, year and a half.
And is that we're more in a consultative role. So we know that we sort of have a good grasp of what the other person is doing, and we're going to read whatever he needs us to read and comment on. And, we'll be pretty brutal in our comments because you want to make it better, right?
Right.
And as Chris pointed out, you're like, okay, what you're saying, what you're telling me you're trying to do, and what's on the page do not match, my friend. So you need to open up the head and put it on the page. And he tells me that all the time because I tend to write in layers. So my first draft will be very sparse, and then and as I go back through it, I typically don't cut a lot unless I'm like cutting an entire chapter. I'll actually be adding as I go along, and that's just how I tend to work.
And sometimes, first of all, there's a real baseline foundation of respect between the two of us, because pretty much anything David writes is going to be pretty damn good, and I would like to think he thinks the same thing about my stuff. So you walk into the room with respect for the other person, and so then you sort of see the not necessarily bare bones, but the incomplete or not yet complete version of a work, and you can say, well, that character back in chapter 2 was like a brute, and now he's crying over flowers. No, I mean, it's kind of a long stretch. It doesn't quite, that motivation doesn't quite work. Oh yeah, okay, I see what you mean. And so then you can either transition it or you can alter it or whatever. So that's the kind of thing I value from him, is that, he'll look at something that I've done and he'll say, I can see why you did it this way, because sometimes we all as writers, we kind of succumb to plot convenience, because we're trying to get from point A to point B, and that's not that character. That character would never do that to get to point B. So you have to make it all jibe for the reader.
Although, funny story, Hank. So on the very first book, I was trying to get it done before I had to turn something in for St. Martin. So I was going along. I was pumping out a first draft, and anything. So Chris has edited my work before for like anthologies and stuff. But anything he's seen before.
I've edited yours too, Hank.
I know.
Anything that he's seen before has been pretty finished.
Right.
So I mean, he was making tweaks. He hadn't really seen a first draft, and I sent him a first draft, and he calls me. He's like, "What the hell is this? This is." He didn't say terrible, but I could read between the lines.
He had his diplomat hat on.
So I'm like,
for change.
Well, that's a first draft. He goes, "Wow, this really needs some work." I'm like, "Well, yeah. I mean, it doesn't all come out, smelling purple roses, dude."
Yeah, but
he's like, "Don't ever send me a first draft again."
That's a perfect example of an answer to your question about working together. Yeah. I don't show anybody anything until I've been through it 3 or 4 times. Yeah. And so he's much less conscious of that. I mean, what's the word I'm looking for? He's not so worried about that as I am. So if I show him something, it's pretty finalized with maybe some tweaks that need to be made based on feedback, right? He showed me a first draft, and I'm like, holy crap, there's so much work left to be done on this. And of course,
I know, that's what you're there for.
Exactly. The answer is yeah. But see, it's just the difference in expectations of what you would want to show somebody as a first draft. He's much more confident than I am, I think. Well, it has to be pretty refined for me to show it to somebody.
Well, it's a difference in writing style, too. I tend to be more like David, where I'm usually working from a rough outline, and then that first draft really becomes a really detailed outline that then I go back and take another pass and flesh out, and take another pass and flesh out, and then kind of onion it, adding layers to it, like David said. And Chris, you tend to be more take more time, and you produce a fairly clean first draft, though, don't you?
Yeah, but see, I think the reason for that is I have a much more iterative process. David and I, our processes are actually very similar, but what he'll do, he'll write from front to back, like the book, from front to back, and then he'll go back to chapter 1, and he'll write another pass through it, and then he'll go back to chapter 1, and he'll write another pass through it. And I'm like, okay, I write 1,000 words of chapter 1, and then tomorrow I'll go back and edit that, and then add another 750 words, and I'll go back on the third day and edit that and get started on chapter 2. So rather than front to back, I do, a little bit at a time, So by the time I get to the end, chapter 1 ought to be pretty damn shiny, So, and it's just a difference in approach.
But both of you are writing in sequence. You're just taking more time moving the sequence along. I have talked to a surprising number of writers lately that write completely out of order, and it makes my brain hurt. I don't.
I'm way too anal for that.
Yeah, have you guys ever done that?
I have not, but I want to say I have discovered what I think is a pretty good, effective, and cool technique. Each of these books has 4 perspective characters in it. I think one of them actually has 5, and so I'll outline it and I'll write it sequentially, day 1 to day 10. Chapter 1 to chapter 30, and I'll write it that way initially, and I'll rewrite it that way initially. When I get ready to do what Nick Cole called the dramatic reading edit, where I print it off, I sit out on a balcony with a drink, and I have a red pen in hand, and I speak the verbiage of the manuscript out loud. It really, really helps with making sure the language, the meter is right, and it flows much better. You don't worry about nouns and verbs, you don't worry about commas, you just worry about how it sounds. So when I'm doing that for this multi-perspective series, I pull all of character 1's chapters together and I edit those as a unit. I pull all of character 2's chapters together and I edit those as a unit. I'm not worried about sequence anymore because I did that when I drafted it. I know this character's on day 1 and this character's on day 3 and all that's all done. But what I do by pulling all of the character chapters together, and there's usually 6 or 7 or 8 of those in one of these books, is then, I said he had a purple mustache over here and he's got a gray mustache over there, or he trimmed his beard but now it's longer over here. It's those kinds of things that I can make consistent, as well as the voice for that character. So if your character is obstreperous and outspoken, then you don't want him to be meek as a mouse in the second chapter, right? And you're much more likely to be able to make that stuff consistent and see that it needs to be consistent if you pull those chapters together and edit them as a unit and then put them back in their place in the overall narrative. So I found that to be very effective.
What about you, David? Have you ever approached, and I think one of the most recent examples was a writer told me that she doesn't outline at all. And the way that she avoids writer's block is when she sits down to write, whatever she's excited to write that day, that's what she writes. And she just always goes where the excitement is. Has anything like that ever happened to you?
I've experimented with writing out of order, especially because, if JR has given me an outline that's that detailed, in theory, I could do that. My experience with it has been that I write with an outline, and I use the outline for the plot details, but I more use the outline to avoid writer's block, because when I sit down, I know that this is the chapter that I'm writing today, and this is what's supposed to happen. Now, what's on the page and what I end up writing don't necessarily have to be the same thing, because I typically, halfway through a chapter, I get a good idea, and I'm like, we should do it this way, because let's do something different. So the problem with that is that you get some things that you've already written don't always match up. So one of the reasons why I write quickly and why I write in sequence is because I don't go back and change things while I'm writing, so I don't go back and polish in things, because I'm more concerned with getting a first draft down. And I really enjoy the first draft process, and part of the reason is because I'm a very goal-oriented guy, and I could say I need to write X thousand words today, and when I get to X thousand words at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock in the morning, I'm like, I have accomplished something today, and that's a tremendous feeling of satisfaction for me. And if I go back and I noodle with the previous stuff, I know the previous stuff is going to change. So going back and noodling with it ahead of time, to me, is not a good use of my time, because I know chapter 1 is going to change by the time I get to chapter 4. It might not change a lot, but it's going to change some. So if I go and I noodle with chapter 1, to me it feels like wasted time, because I'm not making forward progress. I'm going back and polishing something I've already done, but I know I'm going to have to go back and polish it again anyway. So why would you do that twice?
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting point of departure for the two of us as co-writers, because he loves the drafting process, and even though if I have to have an outline, or I just stare at the screen like a deer in the headlights, But I love the rewrite process. My favorite part of the process is doing that dramatic reading where I'm like, okay, no, this language makes it more effective. This is cooler. I love the rewrite process. So we're like, so he's a drafter and I'm the rewriter, and not on the same book, but I mean that's where we like to emphasize.
Yeah. The other thing is it can rapidly be a rabbit hole for me because I have never met a paragraph I didn't want to rewrite. So, you give me something and I'm going to be rewriting it in my head, and I know this, and it can be a huge time suck for me because I unless I'm always trying to push myself forward, I will noodle with the same damn paragraph for a long time. And at noon or 3 o'clock or whenever, that work period that I've set up is ended, I look back and I'm like, well, crap. I have a beautifully polished single paragraph and I have 10 pages I haven't gotten to yet.
Well, let's talk about the new book for a minute. Valhalla Station, book 1 of the second trilogy, book 3 of the first trilogy that came out in November of last year, Hostile Takeover, ended that cycle on a high point, and now we move 30 years into the future. Is that what you said, Chris?
Okay, so we jump 30 years ahead. The Syndicate Corporation is basically formed out of a need to get control of the weather, the climate change that happened on Earth. Governments sort of, tides rose, people migrated, governments failed, and so corporations stepped up and actually, sort of fixed things after quite a bit of conflict, which is sort of the core of those 3 books. And so they formed these 5 families, formed the Syndicate Corporation. There's a manufacturing family, there's a distribution and a distribution family, there's a family that manages the finances. I basically took the model of Sid Meier's Civilization and applied it to and overlaid it with the Godfather's 5 families idea. And so each of the families becomes a faction. You have the Shinlao faction, who is the manufacturing hub, and you have the Tauk faction, who sort of sits at the top of the 5 families, sort of the CEO or godfather of the 5 factions of the Syndicate Corporation. And so it's tootling along for about a generation when my novel starts. Some of the characters from David's trilogy are still alive and some have grown. There are new characters that are introduced. And so things are sort of tootling along just fine for the 5 factions. And then things start to happen. The humanity has spread out from, they were just sort of starting to colonize Mars in the first trilogy, and they've done that, and now they're out on Jupiter's moon of Callisto, and they're now out on Saturn's moon of Titan. There's some people in the asteroid belt in between Mars and the outer planets. So the Syndicate Corporation has expanded outward, and humanity sort of works cradle to grave for the corporation. But the corporation also takes care of them. It's not just you punch in, you punch out. It's not the Apple commercial, if you remember, from 25 years ago, where he's dressed in gray, the George Orwell inspired commercial. So they get something for it too. It's not all one way, but it is a for-profit 5-fingered corporation. And so things start to happen. There's an explosion on Mars in one of the mines. There are some pirates operating in the asteroid belt that shouldn't be operating there. And so some of the infrastructure starts to crumble, and we realize there's sort of a resistance rebel faction that's rearing its head, with, again, ties to the first trilogy. But I want to make the point here that these trilogies, while they are related and in the same universe, they're also standalone. So I encourage you to read the first trilogy to get all that sort of background and get introduced to some of these characters that keep going. But if you don't, for whatever reason, you could start with Valhalla Station and you'll get enough of the background that you won't be lost, you won't be confused.
And following this first book, next month in May, Book 2 comes out, and then Book 3 comes out summer, right?
That's right.
Of 2019.
And then I wasn't going to commit you to it. That's
Don't lock me down like that.
Yeah,
Don't fence me in.
Don't fence me in.
Well, if you start growing an epic beard, we'll start worrying about release dates.
Start wearing with the little French hat and walking around signing books and stuff. Sorry, Winds of Winter ain't coming out yet. Sorry, guys.
I was bracing myself on Monday for Winds of Winter Facebook post, but I think that's probably got an old hat now. It doesn't even work on April Fool's Day anymore.
Right.
So then after that, we're going to have a third trilogy to sum this all up. What are the plans for that third trilogy so far?
You know what? As soon as we have any, we will let you know.
It is. Let's just say it's still a secret right now, even to us.
Right. We could tell you, but then we'd have to kill you.
Yeah.
No. We have an idea, a very amorphous idea in our heads about kind of what we want to do with that, but we're hanging off for now, fleshing it out.
Gotcha. We mentioned earlier that there's some new news about optional retirement plan, which brings this whole thing kind of full circle. Again, what's going on with that, Chris?
Okay.
I know it's coming out soon, right?
Yeah. So our good friends Rhett Bruno and Steve Bruleur created Aethon Books. And Aethon is dedicated to like publishing, sci-fi and fantasy sort of innovative stuff, right? And so I put ORP, optional retirement plan, on the shelf, thinking, I really like the character that I developed in that. It's a first-person sort of space opera noir narrative from a Mickey Spillane type character named Eugene Fisher. He goes by Stax Fisher. His name is Stax. And I really liked that character, and I thought the book was pretty good, and I didn't want to just, put it out as a one-off and, be done with it, which, of course, where all the SynCorp stuff backgrounds come from now. And so Rhett and Steve and Aethon have struck a sort of cool partnership with R.C. Bray the Magnificent. You may have heard of him with series like I know. Who the heck is he? I know. Bray is okay, but he is one of the most talented and lucrative narrators on Amazon and Audible right now. He is a very, very well-known sci-fi narrator. In fact, he did.
He's the voice of Mark Watney.
He's the voice of Mark Watney. He was the voice of Galaxy's Edge on multiple novels. He was the voice of Rhett's series Titanborn. So they've struck a deal with him to do some one-off novels. This is sort of separate and apart from the rest of his career as a narrator. And they created a Patreon page for him, and it's a sort of where it's, if you ever watch like the director's cut of a movie, or you look at the gag reel that's on a DVD, if anybody still buys DVDs anymore, Blu-rays either. I know, I go 8-track, let's see, album, 8-track, 78, 45, 33, 8-track, cassette, CD, DVD, Blu-ray. Oh yeah, streaming.
Back to vinyl.
Yeah. It's like naming all the kids in the house till you get the right one.
Right.
So anyway, he's doing a special deal with Aethon where he's going to be posting reads of these individual novels, these one-off novels, and they're going to have some of the blemishes in them, like where he doesn't quite get the voice right, or and it's great if you like R.C. Bray and you're interested in sort of seeing peering behind the curtain, seeing the man behind the curtain. It's a great opportunity for just seeing how a narrator refines that final sound that you love so much when you're listening to your audiobooks. So they've got a page up that people can come and sponsor. I think $1, $5, $10. I don't remember what the levels are. But in any case, my book, Optional Retirement Plan, is one of the ones that R.C. Bray is going to narrate. And I also, of course, I sold the and paperback book rights to Aethon as well, so it'll be coming out in those formats as well. But I cannot tell you, there's no bullshit, I cannot tell you how excited I am that the voice of R.C. Bray is going to be speaking Stax's words. And I say that because Stax is a smart-ass, tongue-in-cheek, very intelligent, very sly, sort of like if Bugs Bunny were an assassin, he would be Stax Fisher.
Wow, I wish I hadn't said that. Bugs Bunny were an assassin. Really? Really?
Okay,
That's what you got. Bugs Bunny as an assassin.
Well, and what I mean by that is, Bugs is always so sarcastic and tongue in cheek, and so is Stax. So knowing R.C. Bray's narration as I do, I can't imagine a more perfect voice for that character. And so I'm really, really excited that he's going to be doing, as part of this deal with Aethon, he's going to be doing the optional retirement plan audiobook. It's just awesome. And eventually, they'll post the files with the gags and stuff as he does them, and I think they're already doing that for a couple of other books first. But eventually, the audiobook will be finalized, and then it'll be put out just like any other audiobook. So I'm just really excited about that.
Well, there are a few times in life where your place in the universe becomes revealed to you, and you realize that there are forces that are greater than you. Some that may be when your children are born, that may be when you hear R.C. Bray read your dialogue.
Exactly.
But this is one of those things. Yeah.
No, exactly. That's right. I feel.
Do not let your wife listen to this podcast.
She doesn't listen. She doesn't listen.
Yeah.
Don't worry. Yeah.
Like episode 4, she was out.
Yeah. She's like, I'm not listening to 600.
But I have to give a shout out to Steve and Rhett that they're doing something really cool. There was something posted the other day in the group for Aethon Books, and it was Steve posted something about we did this cover and we paid for it, paid the artist for it, and we just weren't happy with it for the author, so we're gonna sell that. Somebody else really loved it, so that's great. We're gonna sell it, and we're gonna redo this cover for this author. And I posted a comment in the group, hey, author for authors, and because Brett and Steve are authors too, of course. So it's like the doctor that's had the disease, they know how you feel, and so they really take care of their writers, and I'm very grateful to them for the opportunity to have Optional Retirement Plan be part of that.
They're doing the Lord's work, that's for sure.
That's right.
That's for sure. Well, the new book is called Valhalla Station, a space opera noir, techno-thriller, SynCorp Saga, Empire Earth, book one of the second trilogy in this amazing meta series. I'm going to have links to it in the show notes. Do you guys have a central location where people can find out about the series in general?
If you go to my website, David Bruns, BRUNS.com. There's a page called SynCorp Saga, and you can find everything you need to know there.
Excellent. And I'll link up you guys' Amazon page and personal sites and all of that good stuff. We're going to send everybody to see you. Thank you guys so much for taking time to come back on the show and talk sci-fi.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. And David, when is that new Tom Clancy Next Generation book coming out again?
June 25th.
Rules of Engagement.
Rules of Engagement from St. Martin's Press. If you're in Minneapolis on the 25th or Portland, Oregon on the 27th of June, we're going to have release events there. So come to my website and look that information up.
Excellent. And keep your ears perked up. You may hear more about it here on Author Stories between now and then. Thanks, guys.
Thanks again, man.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
The year was 1834. The month was December. I was 14. Irving's tale was by then well known. The characters of Brom Bones and the beauteous Katrina were widely understood in town to refer to my parents. Rumors persisted. I heard the name of Headless Horseman whispered. My father dismissed all these tales, calling them malicious. Yet more than once I saw him and my mother scanning Agatha's face across the supper table, finding only a secret smile and a look of defiance. I found the rumors fascinating. I followed Agatha like a pup, waiting for her to cast some magic spell. And one day she did. The household servants had set a fire in the hearth for her comfort, and she sat close to it, counting out small gold coins upon a lapboard. I hid in the shadows, hoping she might drop a coin and I could retrieve it for myself. One of her servants, a West Indian girl, carried a snowy log into the room and set it on the fire. It began to hiss and pop. The snow melted, and the fire sputtered out. Agatha cursed as I had never heard her do before. She stood, spilling all the gold, and slapped the idiot girl across the face. The girl ran, and my grandmother muttered to herself, searching for match and tong to no avail. When she was not looking, I crept forward and took for myself one of the gold pieces. Then something remarkable occurred. My grandmother sighed, knelt before the fireplace, reached for the logs, and her right hand caught a fire. Flame blossomed and coiled about her wrist. I gasped and cried out,
"Shh! Don't be afraid, my Dylan."
"Your hand!" She raised her palm. Flame sat cupped in it, casting the shadow of her fingers upon the ceiling and walls.
"Lock the door,"
she said. I obeyed. She pointed to the floor, and I sat, waiting breathlessly.
"This is the Van Brunt gift. It will be your gift as well, soon, and your children's forever afterwards."
"Why does it not burn you?" I asked.
"Why should it? Do I deserve to be burned?"
"No."
"Then I am safe from the fire. Do you deserve to be burned, my Dylan?"
I shook my head.
"Show me."
I reached for the flame and took it. I pulled back at once, crying out with pain, wagging my fingertips. The fire caught my sleeve. I could not rid myself of it, as if I clutched burning tar. The pain intensified. The blisters broke, and a rivulet of lymph ran down my arm.
"Your conscience knows, Dylan. You deserved to be burned. Say it."
"I deserved to be burned," said I.
"Again."
"I deserved to be burned." She turned her palm.
"The gold piece."
I nodded and brought the stolen coin from my pocket. She took it and raised it to the light.
"You cannot wield the flame with guilt in your heart, son. Try, and it will devour you. Do you understand?"
I nodded.
"A Van Brunt should not be so weak."
"I'm sorry I took the gold, Grandmother. I'm sorry I was bad. Don't be ashamed of me." She frowned and laid the gold coin on her lapboard. She shook her head sadly.
"I'm not ashamed that you took the gold. I'm ashamed that you felt the guilt."